Hi guys, Steve here again with video 3 of 3, the evolution of process. What we'll cover off in this session is the why and wherefore of the way work is. We're going to talk a little bit about research. We're going to talk a little bit about where really progressive companies are going with this stuff, and how we as process professionals could take advantage of some of the opportunity that's been given to us at the moment to really embrace the challenges and make them our own and turn them to good fortune. So let's kick off. Let's not hang around there. Now, as many of us know, there was a time when process meant rigid production lines, inflexible ways of working, autocracy and punitive control. We were very much organised into ranks and files, and pyramids were the way of things in terms of reporting. There will be a cascade down of strategy to the front line, and somewhere in between we were trying to connect the dots, and as process professionals make sure that the services that were being delivered actually met the expectations of customers. Now, as we know, in the last 10 or 15 years, and we've discussed this before, the world has dramatically changed. That seismic shift which has been brought about by the digital era has manifested itself in ways that you and I, as customers, can contact anybody anytime, 24/7, 365, all that sort of good stuff. We expect to be able to contact people through whatever channel we choose. We're promiscuous in our choices and rebellious, all that sort of stuff. So just as a sort of a placemat here, let's think about this. There's now 7.2 billion mobile phones on the planet. That actually exceeds the number of people on the planet. And of course, if we look back over the last 10 or 15 years, that growth is almost exponential now. So let's try this one on for size. So the average adult has an attention span of. So in today, what do you think the average attention span is of the average adult? Well, perhaps I'll give you a clue. Let's go back 15 years and ask ourselves the question, what was it in 1990? It was 34 minutes. That was the average attention span. So what would that be today? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? 3 minutes? I don't know, think about it. What's your average attention span? How soon do you get bored when you're actually doing something, reading something, scanning an email, looking at a video, watching and participating in seminars and things like that? How quickly does your mind turn to something else? Well, these guys who've been doing the research on this suggest, believe this or not now, believe this, it's 8 seconds. So 15 years ago it was 34 minutes. It's now, well, that's sorry, 25 years ago, I'm talking about 15 years ago there. 25 years ago it was 34 minutes, it's now 8 seconds. And interestingly enough, that attention span is 1 second less than the average attention span of your ordinary common old garden goldfish. So what does that mean for us in process? So what, we might say to ourselves? Well, that means that our organisations have to be responsive to customers in ways never dreamt of 15, 20, 25 years ago. And in fact, if we think about this connectivity, this growth in connectivity, one of the pieces of research that came out of Accenture recently suggests there will be 30 billion autonomous things connected to the Internet of Things. So that's our fridges, our cars, in addition to all our standard mobile devices, whatever versions of the iPads and smartphones were running by then. 30 billion of those things. Okay, so again, going to the population of the planet, what will that be by 2020? I think estimates have it at something like 8 billion. So 8, 16, 24, 32, four times per person in terms of that connectivity. Now, in terms of process, what are organisations doing to overcome these challenges? Well, of course, we're talking about it a lot. And boy, are we trying hard. We're trying hard with lots of the techniques and approaches and things that we already know have worked in the past. But quite often the complexity is overwhelming. The complexity puts us in a situation where we feel we can only focus on a singular thing at any one time. And yet we're being deluged with demands for better, faster process, classically, in alignment now with delivering successful customer outcomes without exception every time. Those are big demands. So how are organisations dealing with these challenges? So what we set about to do a number of years ago was to do some research. And the questions we asked of the participants, and there were, as it says there were 841 organisations who are participating in this ongoing study across 54 countries. What are you doing to meet the challenges of the 21st century? What specific process approaches are you using, and what results are you achieving as a consequence? Now, in terms of that 840 odd organisations, there was a real mix in there between private sector, retail, wholesale companies, public sector, governmental organisations, not-for-profits, and indeed charities as well. And the original research we did was back in 2007. We updated it in 2011, and we revised it again in 2014 to see where the dial was moving, if you like, in terms of that broader discussion. So what I'm going to walk you through now is an overview of our findings. And what we'll talk about in those findings is not necessarily that something is better than something else. It's just that things were designed, process techniques and methods were designed with specific objectives in mind. So the question we can ask ourselves whilst you review that information, are the techniques that I'm using really designed for the world we find ourselves in now? So let's start at the left-hand axis there. There'll be improvements. We categorise the improvements that people achieve into 4 broad areas. One, improvements to service. So the improvements to customer service as measured by customer satisfaction ratings, net promoter score, customer experience score, and so on. Improvements to service and cost. So cost, where we are reducing costs, either an immediate cost reduction or an ongoing cost reduction, and again very objectively quantified. The third level of attainment in terms of benefit is around service cost and revenue. By working specifically on processes, we could simultaneously improve service, reduce cost, and grow revenue. Now, we've come to refer to that based on one of Jim Siner's original observations, of Business Process Management fame. His original observation was that if you manage to do service, cost and revenue at the same time, you are winning the Triple Crown. And then there's a fourth emergent category over and above these 3, which is what we refer to as Triple Crown Plus. So in other words, you're focusing on, yes, service, cost and revenue, which, as we all know, whether we're in a for-profit, not-for-profit, government, whatever we're doing, those are the important things that our top team are concerned about. If you're in a private company, it's all about creating shareholder value, and that's how you do it, by improving your service, reducing your costs, and consequently as well growing your revenues. So let's have a look. And what we're going to put on this platform here are the various approaches that have been popularised, delivered, and from my point of view, many of these things I've known and actually done myself. So the first one of these that we can talk about was back in the 1960s, was the birthing of something called total quality management. This idea that what we should do is the customer is always right, the customer is king, all those sort of placards that we used to see around buildings if you're as old as I am. And what total quality management really did help to do was put service on the map. However, unfortunately for many, TQM didn't reach into the organisation. It was really a front-end thing. It was where the customer actually contacted the organisation. But as for the rest of the processes, they really didn't get much attention from a TQM perspective. And in fact, back in the day, I was a business analyst, and I can remember those placards on the wall, "Customer's King," and I acknowledge that. Of course, at the end of the day, I'm a customer as well. But I can remember a conversation I had way back when, which was around the fact that I get the customer, but hey, it's not my job. I'm a business analyst. I'm working away in the innards of the organisation, trying to make things right there. So don't talk to me about TQM. That's really a front-end, front-loaded thing. Now, TQM left us with a legacy of things like the Belbin Award, the European Foundation for Quality Management. All the ISO standards emerged from that thinking around TQM. So it certainly didn't get sort of left high and dry. It's carried its usefulness forward. Now, as a consequence of TQM not really reaching into the organisation and being able to affect the cost equation, people scanned around and various approaches like business process improvement emerged, and then latterly the more aggressive form of that, business process re-engineering. And they actually did begin to address the cost problem and take cost out of the businesses. Unfortunately for business process re-engineering, on one particular economic downturn, it really became shorthand for cost reduction. So of course, if you were in corporate land and somebody said, we're going to do BPR, that meant this is going to be the night of the long knives. It's about job reduction, it's about job relocation, and your job might be in the firing line. So BPR again in its own right fell out of favour and was replaced, particularly in the service side, by something that we already know was well established in manufacturing, and that was Lean and Six Sigma. Seen back in the day as two sort of separate entities, two approaches which, whilst complementary, could be dealt with quite separately. And yes, they did deliver service and cost, and indeed in some of the more advanced forms of Lean and Six Sigma, we began to play with that revenue equation. We began to play with this design for the future type idea, where we would actually create the capability to develop more revenues as we better understood the needs and expectations of our customers. However, unlike many of these things, Lean and Six Sigma had a view of the organisation which was very pyramidal, had a view of the organisation which essentially is production line based, is assembly line thinking. So if we think about techniques like SIPOC, supplier input, process output, customer, where is the customer in that? Oh, the right at the end of the line, of course. And we'd also talk about end-to-end working, which again was another shadow cast by factory thinking, input, activity and output. And as many people have said, and as those leading organisations we'll talk about in a few minutes will profess to, you've really got to put the customer sort of not just first, but front and centre of absolutely everything that you do in the organisation. Now, as an industrial engineer, I was a practitioner and still am a practitioner of many of these techniques. And the challenge we have with Lean and Six Sigma is once you've optimized something, where do you go to next? Where do you take the story? How do you advance that? How can you strategically reform, reshape the organization to meet these challenges of the 21st century? So we frequently meet a feedback which sort of says is, look, I'm spending just as much on improvement. We've got all the guys in the organisation trained up and managed, and they understand this stuff, but the returns that I'm getting are getting less and less. Okay. As a consequence of that, we then saw a shift of many people over towards business process management. Business process management, if you like, as a collective, more holistic approach, began to really deliver this triple crown. It was the idea that it's not just the technology, but it's the way we align process to deliver the outcomes that we desire in alignment with the technology and our skill sets in the organisation. Again, a challenge for BPM is that basically it still has that premise that we start from when the customer touches our organisation to when the customer finishes with our organisation, and that's the end-to-end process. But as we saw in the earlier videos, process now transcends the organisation. It actually starts with when a need arises and isn't satisfied until that need is delivered. So that world of BPM, which was pretty good in terms of fixing some of the issues within the organisation, really hasn't been able to sort of step up to the plate and deliver that transformational change that many organisations need to experience to be able to deliver success going forward. So hence the birthing, if you like, of customer-centric approaches, CEM, customer experience management, sometimes customer expectation management, which again takes the best of all these things. The fundamental difference, however, with CEM and the customer-centric approaches, which use many of these other techniques and methods, is that they're looking at the world through that outside-in lens. They're looking at the world, and if you like, what they're doing is they're beginning to think of the world by working backwards. Now, through this whole sort of cycle of this last sort of 50, 60 years or so, we've seen many sort of pivotal books which were launched and became reading for senior management teams in major organisations across the planet. Outside In was one that I had the good fortune to write in 2010. If you do want a copy of that, again, let me know. If you haven't already got one, I'll be very pleased to be able to send you a copy of that. And then latterly, James Dodkins has produced a book, Foundations for Customer Centricity, which many of you have already read and downloaded. So what, you might say? Well, what we've got are management teams who are in many instances literally exhausted from the rate of change that's happening around us. And yet, those same management teams are often grappling and using tools and techniques that were designed for a different time, designed for a different set of objectives than the ones that we're trying to achieve going forward 2015 and further into the 21st century. So, what conclusions can we draw from that? What can we say in terms of the sort of process world? What do we throw the baby out with the bathwater? Do we abandon everything we've ever known before? As an industrial engineer, do I not need any of those techniques? Do I not need my Lean Six Sigma mastership anymore? Do I have to start over? Well, the really cool news is no, you don't. The sensible thing to do is to start doing outside in, of course, to actually be able to embrace those challenges, but also set about upskilling existing knowledge sets. A really good example of that was one particular organisation in Massachusetts in the US, which had done the Six Sigma thing, they'd done the Lean thing, they'd done the Lean Six Sigma thing, and the CEO was frantic in terms of his competitors were catching up just by emulating what they'd done. His law of diminishing returns had kicked in. He was spending as much on improvement but getting less and less each year. Where does he go to? Well, of course, we did say you should go outside in. So his program is now called Outside In Lean Oil, which for a plastic extrusions company is highly appropriate. So start doing outside in and begin to upskill your existing knowledge sets. And then having gained that knowledge, having got that new learning in place, begin to integrate the current ways with the new approaches. Extend them out. Extend Lean out into the total customer experience, not just the experience from the customer touching the organisation and what happens within, but outwards, right to the boundary of where need is literally created. As then Lean Six Sigma and other techniques become more proactive and more outside-in focused, they can in turn connect the dots right the way from a singular customer interaction right the way back to every task and activity in the organisation. Some of the guys doing this sort of stuff, and we've got case studies if you're interested, and some of you will already know of some of these people. What these guys have got, and if I reflect on the 3 videos, is a really clear definition in terms of what the customer enlightenment means for them in their particular business. They understand who their customers are. So for instance, with guys like Ryanair, and people would contend this one with me, they have a very clear category of customer in mind, and they make sure that everything they're doing is aligned to delivering to that other that category of customer. Woe betide if you and I are not in that category of customer and we fly Ryanair, we might have a subpar experience. Now the same applies to all these guys. They've worked out who the customers are, what their real needs are, and made sure that everything they're doing is aligned to actually achieving those successful customer outcomes that are required. As you can see, there are many different industries, and this is just a few. There are several hundred around the planet now. What I will say as well is there's branding surveys that take place which demonstrate that 9 of the world's top 10 companies are now what we would call outside in. They're looking at the world in the way we've described through our books and the videos. So in terms of how you could potentially embrace the same thing, we have this thing called the CEM method, which you've seen the web link for. I'm sure many of you have actually already investigated that. There's a ton of resources in there. There's the methodology itself, you can download it. There's webinars from the last 2 or 3 years over it. CEM method itself originally was formed back in 2007 on the back of work within the Virgin conglomerate. There are over 300 different companies now within the Virgin Group. And it's grown over time. It's now in version 10. And it's developed in such a way that you could pretty much drop into this, if you like, jigsaw at any place. Don't get too hung up again on the acronyms. They're very much for the people who are using this stuff actively. And it breaks down into discrete steps and stages and techniques that you might use when you're approaching the business from a certain objective in mind. So just to give you a flavour of that, on the 1 to 42 steps, if you're taking a core approach, aligning is all about truly understanding your customer and make sure you're really aligned to doing that. The first things that we do is we quantify that. We have to objectively make a statement of what the real needs are. Not some platitudinal needs, not what the customer says they want, but the real needs, even when the customer doesn't know that themselves. You may move on from customer alignment into optimize, and optimize is about using techniques and approaches which allow us to radically improve process. And when I say radically, and again this will blow the socks off some people who haven't had this experience yet, we typically would expect to get returns on a process improvement of 80 to 90% improvement against cost, revenue, service, elapsed time, and so on. So those numbers seem unreal until you actually practice this stuff, but testimony again is those organizations we've just reviewed. Another key aspect of process approaches for the 21st century is around innovation. How do we innovate? Is innovate the lone warrior trying to figure out how to get from A to B, or is it a collective endeavour? And of course it's a collective endeavour. If you can figure out what the right thing to do is, you'll innovate to do it. And then moving again to the right, supplemental and steering approaches are at the more advanced levels. But the three core levels, how to align, optimize and innovate around process, are fundamentally what makes the difference between those organizations who get it and those who don't. And when we get down to brass tacks about that, that's whether you and I as process professionals understand the challenges that we face and we're able to articulate them in a way and deliver on a promise that we can make that we will help to radically transform the organization. So that's the third and final video of this series, The Evolution of Process. I do hope you've enjoyed the videos and you enjoy the books. Again, if you want a copy of Outside In, please do let me know. My details are below this video. Of course, if you want to browse the content of our programs, our courses, there's three specific ones we will point you at. And again, if you sign up within the timescale that we've identified below the video, we'll give you a big discount to actually get you along to one of these sessions, let you understand it. Come and do one of the open sessions, or indeed if you're interested in doing in-house sessions which are customized to your environment and your business, again, let me and my team know and we'll be very pleased to help. Once again, thanks for your time. I look forward to meeting with you soon. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.